Hello and welcome to Deloitte's Debriefs Tax webcast series in Asia Pacific. Our webcast today is from our Global Mobility Talent and Reward series and is titled Reshaping the Future, How Generative AI Will Transform Global Mobility. My name is Jod Gill and I am a partner based in Deloitte, Singapore, and I specialize in supporting clients in the AP region with tax, immigration, and technology enablement solutions to their wider business issues. I have the pleasure of hosting today's webcast. I have one speaker with me today who is also a very good friend. So, Delisha Kulasiria. Delisha is a managing director based here in Singapore as well, and is the innovation leader for Deloitte Asia Pacific and the managing director for Deloitte Center for the Edge, which is part of a global management research institute exploring the edges of business and technology. You may access our bios on the left side of the screen. Before I introduce the agenda for today's webcast, I'd like to take a moment to highlight some of the features of our webcast console. First of all users are on listen-only mode. If you have any content-related questions, you can submit these at any time in the Q&A box at the bottom right of your screen. We have left plenty of time to respond to your questions at the end of the presentation. So please do drop in your questions as we go through today. And then second, all PC users can maximize or minimize each box at your convenience during the webcast. You may also explore the icons at the bottom of the screen. And if you want to download today's slides and related publications, please go to the downloads and links box. On the other hand, mobile device users can view the slides and answer the surveys on screen. And then finally, if you require an attendance record for this event, you will receive an automated email with a CPE certificate after watching for at least 50 minutes. Now, let me give you an overview of the topics that we will discuss today. Delisha will shortly introduce himself and cover the fundamentals of generative AI so that we have a baseline of understanding. I will then take you through how we expect Gen AI to impact global mobility. Delisha will then cover the very important ethical dimensions and risks that we as an industry need to navigate. And I'll then talk about the practical steps that you can take now to prepare for the significant changes that Gen AI will bring. We'll then finish with some Q&A. So Delisha, over to you.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear us? You can, right? Okay. I can't see myself or the screen I'm presenting. But John, you can hear me, right? Because I can't hear myself. Okay, good.
Yes.
There we are. Sorry about that. Now, what would be a webinar without some technical difficulties, right? We're talking about generative AI and the age of AI, and we can't seem to get ourselves connected on the internet. So there we are. Well, let's get started here. Yes, my name is Dulisha Kulasuri, Managing Director for the Center for the Edge, which is one of our futures think tanks. And as of now, this topic that you see all these headlines on is the topic on everyone's mind, generative AI. And as you can see from the range of topics here, it goes from how fast these things are growing, how it's going to take over human work, how it got sued by A, B, and C, how it's giving you bad information. And these are the topics we're going to delve into today as we jump into this topic, right? So we'll talk about all those pieces. But before we start, I want to get a sense from the folks in the room. How much do you use these tools, right? I mean, if you go to the polling question, how often do you use a generative AI tool like ChatGPT or Bard or Bing? Daily, weekly, monthly, once just to try it out, or never use this tool? So um, all of this came to be when November 30th, OpenAI, the startup that many had never heard about, launched a tool called ChatGPT. And we'll show you some statistics around that soon. And that's what all the buzz was about. Now, there have been many other generative AI tools prior to this, but the public interest in these tools is what drove that magical kind of last 6 months. Well, now it's going to be about 8 months, 10 months, that we've seen kind of emergence of tools that we hadn't for the last decade. So it looks like most have used it once. There's nobody who's never used the tool, right? Am I right in reading this poll? Oh, no, some have never used these tools. Okay, well, you're in for a bit of a surprise. Few use it daily, and some use it weekly and monthly. I'm not sure how many participants we got, but what I want to do next is to actually, for those of you who haven't seen it, because there's quite a lot of people who haven't tried it or maybe tried it once, to run a quick demo. So I'm going to start slide sharing. I'm going to share my screen. And the entire screen, let's go with that. Can you guys see my screen? No, it won't let me share that screen. This is not good. Okay, you know what? Let's. There you go. Entire screen share. Chad, give me a verbal if you can see the screen.
Yes, we can, Delisha.
Excellent. So you guys can see the ChatGPT screen. So for all of you who haven't tried this before, I'm going to do a live ChatGPT thing. I haven't preloaded anything into this. This is a live tool if you were to use this. By the way, it's free to use for any of you as well. Just chat at openai.com. So let's ask, since we're talking about mobility, what might be the impact? Put this out of the way. Hold on for a second. Impact of generative AI on global mobility. Now, we might have to specify what mobility is because it might think that it's EVs or something. You can talk to it as if you were talking to another person, right? So if we do this, and you might need to open up your screen to be large to see the screen well, so you can just write a random question like that in common language, and it will give you a series of answers that you just can't get by Googling. If you Google the same question, you would get a set of links. And by picking through those links, you might find something like this that is relevant to you. It doesn't give you an answer. Never before did we have a tool that gave you an answer like this. So this is pretty amazing. And one of the mistakes that people do when using tools like ChatGPT, these generative AI tools, whether it's ChatGPT, Bard, or Bing, all three are equally good, is that they ask the same questions they ask from Google. They ask for things that are factual to test. And this is not about being factual. This is like having your own team of interns or researchers at your beck and call to do stuff like this. Now, that is a pretty incredible response. It's pretty magical what it gave you. You can't get this from another tool. So it's a completely different genre of tools that we haven't seen before, right? So now, because we're limited in time, I'm not going to do too much demos, but I want to test a few other things. Another one we've been told is that computers can't be creative. And by the way, this comes as a myth in the future. Um, and that only humans are creative, computers can't be creative. Well, let's give it a creative task, right? Let's ask it to write a poem. Let's ask it, can you please write me a poem about my friend Todd, who is very keen on global mobility. And by the way, what should we ask? Let's make it. He likes drinking and partying. Why not, right? Let's see what it comes up with. I mean, this is pretty incredible. We did not have this capability prior to these tools coming out. Hope you can read some of this. I feel like I should read it out aloud to embarrass him. Um, One more thing, and we're going to go back to the slides. So if any of you haven't tried this, you should just go in and test these tools for yourself. It can do translation really well as well. So let's pick a language. I'm not sure where most of the folks are from. We could do Japanese, we could do Chinese, we could do Bahasa. Let's try this. Can you please translate this to? Let's go with Japanese, Chinese, Chinese. Let's go with Chinese. Now, I can't read this, nor would I know if it's good but from my colleagues who have tested this before, they've said it's quite impressive and quite good in terms of, and rather than transliteration, actually it translates the ideas into another language. Very strong and powerful capabilities. And this is why it caught everyone's attention. Now, I'm going to stop sharing here. And if you go back to the slides, I got a whole bunch of things in screen sharing stopped out. This is why, if you look at this graph, this shows the number of days it took for any technology that we kind of are familiar with to get to 1 million users and 100 million users. And if you look at Netflix, it took about 1,000 something, about 3 or 4 years to get 1 million users, much more to get to 5,000. You get Twitter, you get Facebook, you get Spotify, Instagram. It took ChatGPT 5 days, 5 days to get to 1 million users. It's the fastest growing technology ever. And it took them 2 months to get to 100 million users. That's an incredible pace. And it was because of what I just demoed. I hope you caught some of the demo. It was because of that this tool is absolutely magical. It's different from anything we've seen before. So I want to show you two more video clips that expose us to different aspects of generative AI and AI that's already available today and will be prevalent within the next 2 years to set the stage. And then we'll talk through some of the implications of all this, right? So if you go to the next slide, and it's a quick video, and it's a tool that most of us are very familiar with, Microsoft. So let's run this. particular clip I showed you is from Microsoft, but we have no affiliation of Microsoft. I could have easily shown you another one from Google, which owns a similar product for the Google Suite and Bard. No, keep it back on the previous one, just to while I talk about it. And the reason I showed you Microsoft is it's a tool that we use every day. Whether you use the Google Suite or the Microsoft Suite, these are tools we use every day. And if you watch that clip, a lot of what we do every day, responding to emails, working with creating PowerPoints, all that stuff can be done better, faster with these generative AI tools embedded in the system. That is why this is really, really impressive. And that's why it's going to have a huge impact on our day-to-day work. Now, while we're writing this, Sunny was watching one of our colleagues was watching the session we did on the poem, and he said that she asked ChatGPT to write a song on friendship. It wrote the song, gave a song, but actually said which portions to sing in chorus. So these tools are getting very sophisticated in terms of its ability. I want to show you one more clip, and this is about another one of the myths that I want to bust about what computers can do or not. Can we go to the next clip?
你们有没有什么问题要可以提问的？
问小兵，
对，
小兵，那个木子阳有几根头发？
小兵温馨的提醒您，这里是非常近距离的现场，快回到正题吧。
OK。
那再问一个，试一试。
小兵，你为什么叫小兵？
小兵不能回答你的问题，因为你长得太帅了。小兵太好看了。
这个小兵有情商，有情商，果然情商很厉害。
So this comes from a talk show in China, and who they're talking to is a social chatbot called Xiaoi's. Now, Xiaoi's is a social chatbot. Its only job in the world is to carry on a conversation with people. And as you saw in this clip, it was joking with the people, it was flirting with the people. It had EQ, emotional quotient. We've always said computers don't have EQ. This one does. And the reason it does is it's spoken to more than 600 million people. Not a single human being has spoken to more than 1 million people. It understands when you're sad. It understands when you're depressed. It'll always respond to you, right? So we're coming into an era with these tools that a lot of what we said were not possible are becoming possible. Let's run through a few more slides. Let's get through some basics. Now, what is generative AI? Right? What is generative AI? Now, it's a tool that has been fed a whole amount of information that is relevant to it and can respond back, mimicking what a user generated, like what one of us would do. It's mimicking what we would do, right? In a way that we haven't done before. What we showed you was just text with ChatGPT, but the same thing can also be done for images. You can say, give me an image of A, B, C, and D, Judd climbing a mountain, drinking a beer, doing somersaults, and it could give you an image. It can give you videos automatically with just a prompt. It can write code. It can actually code much, much better than it can write paragraphs. So that's a pretty incredible thing. And it can do audio. So in all these domains, it can do what I showed you in text, in all its different domains and modalities. Not all of them are great, but what we're seeing is version 1.0. Next year and the following and the next year, it's going to get better and better and better. So go to the next page, one more fundamental slide on this. What you're seeing on the top here of the stack, the output, which is magical, is a response that feels very user-generated, something like that we would write. Beneath that, there's a prediction engine. Beneath that, there are models that are like the GPT-4 model that OpenAI is using, or the Palm 2 that Google is using, or Llama that Facebook. There's these models that are running the algorithms on it. Beneath that, there's a data stack, and this data stack is extremely important because that's what feeds the beast. And beneath that is the computing power to make it run, right? So what we're seeing is just the tip of the iceberg. There are many things to make it happen. Now, here's the reality about AI. If you go to the next slide, we don't really care about this whole iceberg of everything that happens. What we care is that we can get cheaper solutions, we can get faster workflows, we can get better insights, right? And that's what we care about. We care that it does these things. So, and we shouldn't just talk about generative AI, because generative AI is one part, of what's emerging now, but there are many other AI things. What we want AI and generative AI to do is to automate, make our tasks faster. It could be like email autocorrect, right? To simulate, to run digital twins so that we don't have to do it physically. We can simulate what the option could be and test it out. To interact with us, to speak with us like the chatbot, to predict future things, to interact, to create. So all of these pieces, we just want it to provide us solutions rather than knowing that whole stack. But understanding the stack is kind of important to know how it works, why it works, and where the limitations are. So let me get to a final page here before I hand off to Jod in terms of myths and facts. Now, with these myths and facts, I'm going to tell you, as someone who's kind of studying these things on the edge, that the facts are not really facts, because the facts are changing day to day as these tools evolve. Now, it is true that generative AI, it's not going to make human work obsolete. It's going to make our work much, much easier, because as you saw in those clips, a lot of what we do today can be done better, faster, and cheaper using these tools. But some work that we do today will go away. It's also not going to it's not going to be completely novel in terms of something brand new. But again, as you showed from creativity, it's not that these tools are not creative. It can use all of what we've created as human beings and evolve new things out of it. Yes, it can't create something fundamentally different, but it can be created. Is it always accurate? Absolutely not. So one of the issues right now is that there's a thing called hallucinations, where it'll come up with answers just because you asked it for one. So you'll be very careful about the answers you get from this and the data that's been fed. And can it replicate thought and emotions? Not really, but as you saw in the clip with with Shawai's, can do a pretty good job. So these facts that we say today are at a point in time, and it's going to change. So we've got a very powerful set of tools. I'm going to hand it back to this apply to global mobility.
Thank you, Delisha, for that really informative and engaging introduction. I won't comment on the poem at all. I think my partying days are behind me. But we're now going to focus on how generative AI is likely to impact the global mobility industry or sector. And just before I do get into that in detail, I'd like to build on the question that Delisha asked earlier, in terms of how often do you use generative AI tools for work? So if we could move on to the next slide and the poll. And these are the same responses that you had before, but purely in the context of work. So have you used it for work daily, weekly, monthly, once, or have you never used these tools for work? And whilst we're waiting for these results, I'll share with you some anecdotes just from some of my conversations over the last week or so with clients. I was preparing for this session, and it was really interesting to hear them state some of their use cases around how they've used it. And so for one client, they actually used Chat GPT in order to develop the actual name for a new policy type that they were introducing. Another one to check prompts for policies and what should be included. Another one obtained it to get some data for a presentation. That was a use case that Delisha kind of spoke about earlier. And another one was just to see what it stated on a technical topic. So it's really interesting how varied, even today, the responses that you can obtain. So if we can push the data set to the audience, just in terms of the responses, again, it's really interesting that we've got a small group of us that are early adopters, right? Using this daily, weekly for our work. And maybe in organizations that haven't made clear yet their policies around use of open AI tools. And then we've got other users, shall we say, in that second category in terms of on a more ad hoc basis. But clearly, the largest proportion there is people that have never used these tools for work. I think for all of us over the next few years, we will be moving into daily or weekly in terms of the use of that. So if we move on to the next slide, before we get into specific use cases for mobility, I wanted to remind you just of some of the key value points that we see or we expect Gen AI to drive across all industries, and then we will lay that over global mobility. So, first of all, if you look on the left hand side there, we're talking about efficiency and scale, and that's the automation of these manual repetitive tasks and the ability to do these at a scale that humans just can't do alone. And I think we would all agree that there are very significant parts of the end-to-end mobility process across our entire ecosystem that could be made more efficient and scaled in this way. The third value point there on the left-hand side is quality. And really what we're talking about there is identifying patterns from the large amounts of data that are available. And again, this is a very pertinent common question and issue that we hear in the mobility industry from clients regarding their inability to integrate all of their current different data points from all of their end-to-end processes and to mine these insights in a meaningful way to make their program more effective. And then if we look on the right hand side, we can see Gen AI driving a new frontier of creativity, novelty, and innovation. And I think from my perspective, at least over the last 20 years or so, our industry has driven lots of innovation in the pursuit of efficiency and to improve the experience for our users and for the business. But Gen AI is really going to be a huge catalyst to drive that creativity and innovation further and quicker than we've ever seen before. And then finally, personalization, which is something we've spoken for a long time in the industry about the importance of that assignee experience. And so I'm really excited about how Gen AI is going to help us here on two fronts. So first of all, to personalize outputs for multiple users instead of the current, self-serve type tools that we use today, which is a generic response that would go to Delisha, that would go to me. The responses in the very near future will be tailored to our specific circumstances. Maybe I need additional detail because I have two young children. Delisha may have a slightly different response to his question based upon his profile that the AI will be aware of because it will be accessing a much larger data set. And I think the other part, which is equally important, is that that will then free us up as global mobility professionals to focus on those cases that really do require your human touch, your human EQ in order to manage. And so I think hopefully this slide brings into context that we have, I think, a very strong use case in the mobility industry for Gen AI. So let's move on to the next slide to think about these specific use cases. And to make this easier, we have put these into three categories, which typically we would look at across any technology enablement that you would be looking to implement. So broadly, these would be reducing your admin by taking away those repetitive or low value tasks. The second one there is elevating your role by giving you the capacity and by feeding you those insights into your program that help you align much more closely to your corporate strategy and to be in a position to talk in granular detail about the on investment of your function. And then finally, to help you transform the experience for your assignees and your wider stakeholders. And I think Gen AI has a very clear use case there that will help Copilot users, be that yourselves, be that your business stakeholders or your assignees, in a much more personalized way. So another great use case there could be, those questions that typically assignees have around policy entitlements that could very easily be transferred to a Gen AI co-pilot that would help them do that. And I think, as Delisha showed earlier, that could be made available in any language in terms of translation for those of you with larger programs, which typically can be an issue in terms of policy documents are typically written in one language and not necessarily translated to multi-language examples. If we move to the next slide, this was something where I thought, let's ask Gen AI what Gen AI thinks the use cases are for global mobility, and this shows the response at a very high level that that the conversational assistant came back with. I spoke earlier about Gen AI reducing admin and delivering at scale, and that first column there speaks to that. Personalized task lists is something that I think was reflected in one of the videos that Delisha shared, but you will very soon have those task lists created for you when you come in to start your day. Gen AI could also highlight any policy exception cases and drop those into your inbox with no prompt from you being required. Vendor management is also a significant time investment for many mobility functions, with so many providers in that supply chain. So there is definitely a use case there where those interactions could be made far more efficient. And interestingly, it's specifically focused on relocation and temporary housing as an area where efficiencies could be driven. Moving to the second area there of elevate your role, it's quite interesting. I think many of us that have been in the industry for a while recognize many of these as holy grails that we've spoken to and that we've tried to make progress with, but many organizations just have not been able to have the granular detail, the granular examples of to take that back into the business to show the success that mobility has helped to support. But Gen AI will be a real opportunity for you to do that. So in the not too distant future, again, the data will be available to optimize your candidate selection process, give you a prediction on the probability of success of that assignment. And some talent management platforms are already speaking to this, but it really will be in a new frontier to demonstrate the improvement of that ROI in a very granular way. The next piece there is around data analytics, where with all of that data being integrated and Gen AI being able to look for those patterns that a human just won't be able to spot, just with the quantum of data that's there. Again, that will be in a world where you'll be proactively sent ideas and prompts that could help you to optimize costs or drive experience improvements or areas of risk that hadn't necessarily been highlighted or mitigated previously. And then finally, we talk about transforming the experience. And the applications here are endless, as we spoke about, in terms of 24/7 personalized assignee support could be available in different languages, the ability to proactively monitor assignment performance and to send prompts to managers in the host or home location to drive far more relevant development or performance conversations, and significant implications for how cultural and language training is currently delivered or how repatriation success is monitored. The suggestion that really struck me, though, and just a reminder again, this was Gen AI giving its view on use cases for Gen AI in global mobility. If you remember the first slide that I spoke to, we spoke about novel ideas or increased creativity. And so what struck me with these suggestions was this final point around health and well-being monitoring. Because typically, as an industry, we all understand how moving to a new country is extremely stressful for many assignees. And we typically provide reactive support to that in terms of, there may be coaching that's available in location or other support materials, but you typically need somebody to put their hand up and say, I need to access those. Whereas in this case, Gen AI could be looking for those prompts and could be contacting that individual when they think it's appropriate to do so to say, hey, are you okay? These resources are available to help you. Have you thought about connecting with your manager? And maybe possibly even contacting the manager to say, Delisha, you might need to check in on Jod here. He's showing signs that he may need some additional support. And I think that's a great example of how Gen AI can unlock creativity and how we deliver support and transform that going forward. So let's move through to the next slide. We've spoken about some of the use cases, and I wanted to demonstrate here how Gen AI could impact the global mobility lifecycle. And we've spoken to some of these, but not necessarily in the end-to-end process. And so, first of all, we have the identification of talent and matching talent to the right opportunities. And Gen AI's role here will be to match the most appropriate employees to new opportunities and to predict the success of that. And DEI is a huge priority for all organizations. And I think this will only help and show progress in that regard, where people that necessarily haven't necessarily thought that, mobility or an assignment or, working overseas was right for them may well be prompted and help those diversity efforts. We then move to deployment, and you could have, an example here where there's real-time, relatively accurate cost projections, giving the business more certainty around the costs of deployment, and also the creation of more personalized policies, which again will point to how Gen AI will elevate that experience by making it more personalized. When we talk about deployment itself, it's likely to benefit from far more enhanced self-service options that can provide more practical and relevant responses. An example could be, if you have a self-service type support at the moment and somebody's asking about housing options, they would probably get a copy of your housing policy or, whatever your vendor has provided with regards to that. Whereas potentially, again, in the very near future, you could just type in terms of the co-pilot that would be supporting the assignee. The co-pilot would know that Jod has two young children. Maybe his decision making is more based upon schools, etc., areas around that, and then would provide a very specific list of accommodation that would suit my needs based upon feedback from other assignees that had been received previously. So you can see that the value and the power there would become far, far more powerful. And then we move to the support use cases, which are relatively straightforward. And then the final section there in terms of measure, assess, and redeploy. And this is where I think you'll be able to make huge strides around demonstrating the elevation of global mobility's role, where we can prepare assignees more effectively for their repatriation, to check in on their well-being, and ensure that process is going as intended and being measured in a very demonstrable way. One of the biggest issues we see is there's a very high proportion of assignees that leave the organization after they return back to their home location because of how that process is maybe not given as much focus as needed. And then finally, the data insights and trends, which I think, again, will be probably one of the most significant use cases here in terms of correlating data and finding patterns that we just are not able to find with the human naked eye, or even through, if you're particularly skilled at using macros or data, you just won't be able to scale it in the way that generative AI will be able to support you to do so. So if we move on to the next slide, here we wanted to give you a more visual representation of how your day may change after Gen AI is implemented. So please meet Ned. Ned is our hypothetical mobility professional. And Ned's day at the moment, I mean, some of you may resonate with Ned's day, in that large moments of his day are spent doing work about work. And what we mean by that is the admin that surrounds your role that you have to do before you actually get to your role. So preparing your to-do list, preparing slides, etc. All of that is time that, as Delisha mentioned earlier, that can be done more efficiently with using Gen AI. And that can be replaced with the use of Gen AI to give you more time on focus work and more collaboration time, or more effective collaboration, should we say, and hopefully some more personal time to ensure that work-life balance is represented as well. So if we look at a day in Ed's life in the future, the bottom half of that slide, that could start with AI generating his to-do list based upon the activity in the previous day, and emails already being drafted and meeting invites already being drafted for Ned to review before they're sent. AI could then follow up with summaries of any policy exception requests and a summary of employee feedback sentiment analysis that would then need to be reviewed to think about what actions might need to be taken with regards to that. Ned then has a meeting with the business. So AI could analyze that data and provide chart suggestions and PowerPoint slides for that meeting. And that data could then be integrated to a visualization dashboard and integrated with other data sets with insights ready for Ned to review. And then finally, that day, Ned would have an important presentation for leadership based upon the employee feedback from earlier in the day. And AI could create a summary of questions that leadership might ask him and generate recommended actions or discussion points so that Ned is fully prepared for those discussions. This is a hypothetical example, clearly, but I think it's very clear that our working days are set to change very significantly and in the very near future. And Delisha gave a great example of that in terms of consumer grade applications, which are going to be integrated into the tools that we use every day. And that will drive a change in expectation from our users around why global mobility can't move with that and can't offer the same type of experience through the interactions that those users have with us. So if we move through to the next slide, I think that raises one very fundamental question, and that is, what are the skills that we will require in order to meet these new needs? And so here are some examples of some potential new personas that will exist in the mobility function in the not too distant future, and something for you to consider in terms of the current skill sets that you may have in your team. So first of all, there at the top left, we have the CX, or the customer experience consultant. So this person will be a design thinker who will focus specifically on ensuring that your assignees and the business have that best possible experience. That will be their role. They won't have other aspects of the role. That will be the entirety of their role. We then have the mobility performance manager, and this person will ensure that the function is strategically aligned to wider business strategy and that the function is being as elevated as possible. Then the mobility data analyst there at the bottom left. And this is the expert who applies analytics to function and assignment performance and could feed that into the mobility performance manager so that they have those insights as well as being augmented by what is being provided by the Gen AI solutions itself. If we move to the right-hand side, you then will have a digital governance and ethics manager. And this role may be within the global mobility function. It may be a wider role within the organization, but it will certainly exist. And their role will be to ensure that the Gen AI is deployed ethically and is aligned to company policy, with the algorithm being reviewed and audited regularly to minimize that human and robotic bias that may exist. And Delisha will talk about that shortly. I think a great example here is I spoke earlier about talent identification. Clearly, there will be a lot of interest, maybe some concern to ensure that the process by which that talent is being identified or how success is being measured is fully aligned with your corporate culture, and it's being done in the ethical way that would be expected. And then we get to the more, shall we say, robotic type roles that will come through. And so you have the robotics capability manager who will maintain the bots and the Gen AI solutions, and that will be embedded within the team. And then finally, you will have generative AI applications and robots, and they will be integrated. They will be a full part of your team as the human members of your team. And I think that's a pause for reflection for all of us to consider how many of these skills you currently have in your teams. And if not, how you can develop these skills over the forthcoming months and years. Because again, as Delisha spoke about, the pace of change here is something we've never seen before. I know we say that a lot about technology, but this is literally moving day by day, week by week. So we will now move to the final poll of today's session. And here we really wanted to understand what excites you most about the potential global mobility applications of generative AI. Is it A, reducing your admin, B, elevating your role, C, transforming the mobility experience, D, reskilling to a mobility role of the future, E, you're not excited, i.e. you're worried, and then finally, don't know, not applicable, if you think that's the case. So just whilst we're waiting for those results to filter through, again, I'd like to highlight this is a very fast moving space and there are a number of considerations for you to think about. So please do ensure you take the time to understand how your organization is approaching the use of generative AI and any guardrails that you need to be aware of. So we're just waiting for the results to come through. It's quite an interesting response rate here, actually. If we can maybe push the results through to the audience as it stands, we can see here the majority of attendees are excited about reducing their admin. And I put my hand up with you there as well. I mean, absolutely, that's something I think we all look forward to, so that we can focus on more valuable activities. We then have around 15% about elevating your role, which absolutely I think generative AI will allow you to do that. And then we have a fairly even split around transforming the mobility experience, around 24%, and then reskilling to a mobility role of the future. That's great to see, because I think, you know, lifelong learning is something that's important to all of us. It's going to be even more critical, I think, over the years to come, in terms of making sure you're best placed to take advantage of the opportunities that generative AI will bring. And then we've got only 2% that are not excited. I mean, that's understandable. I thought that result might be slightly higher in terms of that category. But hopefully, with what you've heard today and maybe later, we might be able to get you slightly more excited. So I will now throw back over to Delisha, who will cover the ethical dimensions and risks.
Right. If we can skip past the this one and go to the next one. So with these tools are quite magical. They will change the way we work, but with it comes a set of risks too, right? I mentioned before this concept of hallucination. These tools actually want to please you. So if you ask them a question and keep persisting, it'll give you an answer that it'll think that you like, which will be completely made up. It's a good fibber. So you do have to worry about that. You do have to check the work, and in many cases you might have heard about these hallucination things. Now it does beg the question: if you were to provide something and you didn't check the work, you can't just say, "Hey, Bard gave it to Bing, gave it to me, or ChatGPT gave it to me," right? It's the same as you can't give an answer like, "I just Googled it." So the onus still is on the human being. It does have bias or could have bias because it's based on the data that is fed. If the data that is fed has bias, the response it'll give will reflect that bias as well. There are issues with IP violation because these tools are built on large language models, on large models of data, and sometimes the data that has been fed may not have gone through the right IP protocols. They may be using, it might have been fed data that was actually private or have IP issues. So you could be liable because of that. There are privacy issues in using this in your company context. You could end up divulging information that you shouldn't. And there are definitely ethical issues in some of the use cases as well. So it does come with all the risks. It's a new tool. We have to learn how to use it. Regulations are coming into play on how it's going to get managed. Companies are figuring out where those guardrails are. And that's going to be really an interesting landscape to watch over the next year or two, because the consumer front is going to move forward very quickly, and the enterprise front is going to be a little bit more cautious for all of these risks and trying to manage these risks in a meaningful way. So, John, back to you in terms of next steps here.
We can move through to the next slide. Okay, so let's wrap up on how you can get started. So first of all, educate yourself on generative AI to strengthen your baseline knowledge. But most importantly, be able to articulate the generative AI use case for mobility and how this fits into your digital transformation journey to your North Star so that you are ready when that conversation is needed. Point two, connect internally to understand your organization's AI strategy and how you can best integrate your priorities into what's happening more widely. Number three, examine and review your data, as this will be key to training the generative AI applications that you end up deploying and getting the insights and the benefits that you want. Point number four, assess your team's skill sets and identify gaps where you need to upskill or bring in new skills. Point number five there is about value, and that is to start developing your business case and thinking about how could you pilot generative AI in your program to demonstrate that ROI as quickly as possible, to build consensus so that when the time comes, as Delisha spoke about there, in terms of organizations moving from consumer to the enterprise side, that you're as high up the list as possible in terms of getting the support and the access and the prioritization that you need. Because as we demonstrated earlier, there are many significant use cases in global mobility where you can either improve the experience or elevate your role or reduce your own administration. And then the final point there, point six, don't wait. And I think that's probably the most important one, is there are many things that you can do today to start or accelerate your digital transformation journey. And for many programs, that could start with some very simple steps, such as automation, RPA, data wrangling, or dashboarding of relevant data to help drive those, low-hanging opportunities to drive efficiencies or improvement in experience that can start to help you get ready for the transformation that will lie ahead. Okay, that brings our formal kind of part of this presentation to an end. So we do have a little bit of time, and we will throw that into some Q&A before we close more formally. So Delisha, there are some questions that have come through.
One of the questions is, how is Deloitte, are we planning to launch our own AI-based ChatGPT? And I could speak from my kind of innovation hat here that no, we are not. There are many large companies who have invested millions, billions of dollars into developing these tools. So we wouldn't be focused on that. We will be focused on bringing those tool sets to the enterprise arena, whether by setting up private LLMs, private kind of gated systems, or enabling the use of these tools into workflows. So I think that's the way we're kind of heading with this right now. We would not be deploying our own chatbots at this point in time.
And so, Delisha, another general question for you before I pick up the mobility questions. How quickly do you think Gen AI will be scalable for use in internal functions? So that move from consumer to enterprise.
Right. I think within the next year, there's already many pilots and POCs within firms and even with firms like ourselves as well as the clients. So everyone is testing these out, and it's only a matter of time before these things get out and start getting used in the wild. What they're testing for now is against all those risks I talk about, against hallucinations, against bias, IP violation, privacy, unethical use. So they're trying to figure out what can be done meaningfully within those guardrails.
Okay, thanks. I'll pick up a couple of mobility questions now then. So we've had one question come through. Are any of your clients using AI tools in the mobility space? If so, in what capacity currently? So there are certainly some examples in terms of where we are embedding AI into our own tools that we're developing. So for example, a co-pilot type support that we've developed in India for global mobility teams is an example of that. But also early movers here have put in some AI capabilities in terms of initially those kind of conversational type tools that they've been using internally. Um, we've got to draw a distinction between AI and generative AI, which I think is an important one in terms of that. And I think in terms of generative AI, what we're starting to see is that some of the early movers are looking at pilot feasibility, and as I mentioned earlier, picking areas where they think the biggest use cases for them are. So I was speaking with a client last week, and for them, they do lots and lots of lump sum calculations internally. So they're looking at how that can be made more efficient with generative AI. They're looking at how some of their recruiter and internal counseling sessions could be made, shall we say, more efficient and a better experience through co-pilot support. And they're also looking at how they could build more personalized policy packages for individuals based upon their circumstances. And then one more question, just in terms of that's come through, and I think particularly relevant here in our AP region. What are the potential applications for smaller mobility programs or mid-size mobility programs? So for you, what we'd say is, first of all, lean on your vendors. Across the entire ecosystem, they will have their own AI strategy, generative AI strategy, in terms of the tools that they're bringing to market, all the way through from relocation, cultural support, all the way to the end in your downstream services. And also think about, if you haven't already, start thinking about your digital North Star and the smaller digital transformation steps that you can drive efficiency or experience improvements. So that brings us to a close. Unfortunately, that's all we have time for. We hope that you have learned about the potential use cases of generative AI in global mobility, and don't hesitate to reach out to me at jgill@deloitte.com if you have any questions in relation to this or to your wider technology enablement journey. Delisha, thank you. And a special thanks to all of you who are able to join us today. We would like to encourage you to fill out the short survey that will pop up on your screen soon and tell us what you think about today's program. We do apologize for some of the technical issues that some of you may have faced at the beginning of this session. If you joined us late, please note that this presentation will be archived for future viewing. If you feel that others would benefit from this webcast, please share it with them via the share this icon or have them visit the Debrief's website. We will respond to all the questions submitted during the webcast in a couple of weeks. And also, if you think of any other questions or comments later, please feel free to reach out to me or Delisha. We'd be happy to talk to you and help you with your AI journey. And please don't forget to tune in to our next scheduled webcast from our geography updates on 27th September, entitled Potential Issues in Online Gaming Industry, Considering the Recent Changes in the Law. And finally, from all of us at Deloitte, thank you for your participation in Deloitte's Asia Pacific Tax webcast today. Thank you, goodbye, and have a great rest of your day.